For generations, Hollywood has been shrouded in glamour fantasy and the assumption that their tales were founded on friendship, craftsmanship, and mutual successes. Behind the silver screen, however, tempers frayed, egos inflated, and secrets hung in the shadows of dressing rooms, movie sets, and long-abandoned disputes. There was scandal, there was resentment, and sometimes there were betrayals that marred entire productions. Some never fully emerged from the shadows, but rumors lingered, poised to be uttered. And then there was one voice, grown faint with the passage of time but still recognizable, rising above the veil of nostalgia. In the moments before his voice grew faint and his body weak, Val Kilmer, the brooding actor who made a career out of intensity, mystery, and explosive genius, issued a final admission that startled even those who knew him best. In a near-sheer act of defiance, Kilmer named 6 actors and collaborators he could never abide, people whose presence in his life and work had left scars that never did heal. "I held my tongue for decades," he purportedly said, "but they know what they did." It wasn't petty disagreements, not ego-born rivalries. For Kilmer, these names were freighted with betrayals, creative conflicts, and emotional bruises that defined Hollywood's darker side during its golden years. One of the most notorious of these was his rivalry with Marlon Brando in the ill-fated production of The Island of Dr. Moreau in 1996. On paper, the movie had appeared to be a daring, ambitious reworking of a science fiction staple, bringing together 2 heavy hitters whose combined box office appeal could have resuscitated the troubled script. In place of artistry, however, the world saw a catastrophe. What had started as a high-concept project rapidly fell apart, derailed by egos too big to survive together. Kilmer was then at the peak of his popularity. He had dazzled in the doors, tested his mettle in Tombstone, and solidified his box office draw as Batman in Batman Forever. He was a man of extreme intensity and ability, but more and more of late, with whispers of arrogance and instability. Brando, meanwhile, was well beyond his prime but very much still untouchable, the living embodiment of method acting and legend, able to turn even his most bizarre behavior into erratic brilliance. For some, the combination held out the prospect of greatness. Instead, it produced one of the Hollywood's most notoriously toxic film sets. Right from the start, Kilmer's antics unsettled the crew. He reportedly insisted on fewer shooting days, fought with crew members, and generated such tension that original director Richard Stanley was dismissed after a few days. The studio hired veteran John Frankenheimer, but what he took over was not just a chaotic production, it was a battleground of egos. Kilmer and Brando would not play ball with one another or even beyond time. Hours, sometimes even days, were wasted as the 2 actors sat in their trailers, taunting the other to make the first move. Brando, the notorious oddball, made the set his own personal circus, refusing to memorize scripts, insisting on being fed dialogue through an earpiece, and even having an ice bucket on his head between shots. Kilmer, on the other hand, was characterized as testy, undermining the crew members, questioning Frankenheimer's authority, and quietly engaging in wars against anyone who crossed him. Their mutual disrespect overflowed in moments of devastating dialogue. In one of the most famous wisecracks ever uttered, Brando stared Kilmer down and retorted, "Your problem is you confuse the size of your paycheck with the size of your talent." The retort cut to the bone, and it caught the truth. 2 men too arrogant to give in, bringing a whole production crashing down with them. Frankenheimer struggled to keep the film on life support, but even he hit his limit. When Kilmer finally got the last scene shot, his director didn't try to conceal his relief. He turned to his crew and allegedly barked, "Now, get that bastard off my set." Later he announced that he would never again work with Kilmer for all the money in the world. His words were not mere hot air rage. They were representative of an industry-wide resentment at Kilmer, whose brilliance too frequently arrived in concert with disarray. When The Island of Dr. Moreau finally opened in theaters, it was a failure criticized by critics and bypassed by the public. Brando's reputation was still surprisingly intact, his peculiarities as eccentric legend, But Kilmer was labeled as troublesome, egotistical, and wrecking. The feud was a tale told in horror stories, and it followed him for years. But Brando was not the only name on the list for Kilmer. Another was in his stint on Red Planet back in 2000, when he violently conflicted with Tom Sizemore. Whereas Brando might have been a clash of titans, Sizemore was a powder keg prepared to blow. Both men had reputations for volatility, but together they were horrible. The conflict started over as mundane an item as a bit of exercise equipment. Sizemore, committed to staying in shape throughout the long, brutal Australian shoot, had a piece of fitness equipment transported to location. Kilmer, perpetually critical, grumbled that the delivery was unnecessary and disruptive. To Sizemore, already struggling with demons in his own life and a short temper, the complaint was an insult. Fuming, he stood up, grabbed a 50-pound weight, and hurled it through the air, narrowly missing Kilmer. The action was reckless, risky, and unforgettable. Later, tensions again burst into flames when Sizemore pushed Kilmer in a quarrel, almost taking their animosity into violence that could have had the production shut down. Set became intolerable. Producers talked of replacing one of the actors, but logistical requirements made it unthinkable. What they did instead was to keep both under strict code of conduct, apart whenever possible, their contact relegated to minimum requirements of the film. Carrie-Anne Moss, their co-star, later alluded to the poisonous atmosphere, saying she had never experienced so much tension on a set. The movie itself, under the weight of creative defects and tainted by its on-set battles, faltered at the box office. And again, Kilmer's reputation became even darker, solidifying his position as one of Hollywood's most troublesome stars. A few of Kilmer's feuds were not conceived on sets, but grew out of personal vendettas, festering resentments nursed over years. One such bizarre incident was with Matthew Modine. The two actors had not collaborated, had not shared a stage or a screen. But one morning in a Los Angeles restaurant, Kilmer approached Modine without preamble and snarled, "I'm sick of you, man." Modine, baffled, had no idea what Kilmer was talking about. Later, the truth emerged. Kilmer had once auditioned for the lead in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, a role that eventually went to Modine. For Kilmer, the rejection cut deep. Kubrick's movie represented a chance at artistic immortality, the type of career opportunity actors only dream about. Being passed over by Modine had eaten at him for years, and the resentment finally erupted in a strange public altercation. To Modine, the tirade was baffling and inconsequential. But to Kilmer, it was an open wound that refused to heal, a constant reminder of what could have been. Even more acrid was the battle he had with David Mamet, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright and director. Their work on the 2004 political thriller Spartan should have been a success, but it gave rise to one of Kilmer's most well-documented breakdowns. On the DVD commentary, rather than providing insight into the movie, Kilmer unloaded venom on Mamet. He described him as cruel, disdainful of actors, and manipulative. He taunted him as a performer hater because he had been a failure at acting himself. He derided his techniques, his domination of lines, even his iconic beret. "I hate him," Kilmer spat, and his venomous tone dripped like poison. It was a sensational tantrum, not murmured in seclusion, but seared onto a public document forever. Hollywood bridges are usually bubbling, but not always reduced to ashes. Kilmer torched this one. Mamet never publicly replied. But those close to him knew the affair was over, and the feud another part of Kilmer's stormy history. There was also Joel Schumacher, director of Batman Forever. The casting of Kilmer as Bruce Wayne should have been a career highlight, putting him at the center of one of Hollywood's most financially successful franchises. But the collaboration with Schumacher soon fell apart. Kilmer was remote, argumentative, and intractable. Schumacher went on to call him childish and impossible, remembering occasions of frank hostility and even a pushing altercation. 2 weeks into the shoot, the director would not talk to him, staging the film as best he could around him. Warner Brothers began to suspect. While Batman Forever took in more than $330 million, the studio quietly substituted George Clooney for Kilmer in the follow-up, attributing the move to scheduling conflicts but secretly admitting the real reason: Kilmer's antics had lost him the cape. Al Pacino made a last appearance. Their collaboration in Michael Mann's Heat was superb, the supporting cast delivering one of the best crime epics of its time. Behind the camera, though, it was difficult. Kilmer's passion occasionally overflowed into conceit, and Pacino, deeply attached to the respect of all workers on location, was affronted when he watched Kilmer deride a young gopher. Pacino, whose word had enormous authority, took Kilmer aside and labeled him impossible. The altercation never reached blows or bedlam, but it established a point of principle. Kilmer may have bickered with directors and co-stars in the past, but this was Pacino, a legend whose respect had to be earned. Theirs turned frosty to pure professionalism, and they never collaborated again. Every one of these rivalries, Brando, Sizemore, Modine, Mamet, Schumacher, Pacino, was more than rumor. Together, they presented a picture of Val Kilmer as both gifted and self-destructive, a man whose talent was unarguable, but whose personality regularly burned those who crossed his path. He argued on his own behalf as an artist in search of integrity, not willing to bend, but to many he appeared combustible, arrogant, even brutal. With his health waning, his voice sickened by illness, Kilmer passed on not only a body of performances that will never be forgotten, but also a legacy of broken relationships and bitter remembrances. When he enumerated those 6 names, it was more than a list. It was an ultimate sigh of resentments borne too long, a mea culpa by a man who lived in the genius and the darkness of Hollywood. And so, the question remains, what do we make of the names Val Kilmer despised, the feuds that color his legacy? Were they the battle wounds of an impassioned artist who refused to compromise, or the detritus of a man too arrogant to share the spotlight? Or perhaps both. Ultimately, Kilmer's legacy is not one of gross villainy or victimhood. It is a tale of Hollywood itself, lovely, brutal, full of genius, ego, and the relentless conflict between art and ambition.